Hello and welcome to the 8th of our Growing Care Farming monthly themed webinars. This webinar is going to tell us more about governance and things to consider when setting up or even perhaps changing how you've got your care farm structured. So we hope you enjoy it and find it useful. Just to go through a few housekeeping points to start with. The webinar is being recorded, so it'll be uploaded to the Social Farms and Gardens website and the Growing Care Farming YouTube channel in due course. So you can always go back and revisit anything that you feel you missed. Your details and attendance are private and we won't be sharing those with anybody. Attendees are not visible via video link, so you can see us, but we can't see you, and you're all automatically muted. So again, you can hear us, but we can't hear you. We'll be doing a question and answer session at the end, and you can ask those through the questions function on the menu. You'll see that normally to the right of your screens, there's a little sort of grayed out box which says questions. You can type any of your questions in there and one of the team will pick it up and ask it on your behalf later on at the end of the presentations. Feel free to post questions as we're going, or again, if there's stuff at the end that you want us specifically to pick up on, you can post it then. And any links in the presentation we will paste in the chat function, which is just below the question function, and you can click on those and view that information during the webinar. So you should be able to see four faces on your screens at the moment. I'm Deborah Evans, the Regional Care Farming Manager for Growing Care Farming. I'd like to introduce Karen McGarrity. Karen, do you want to give us a wave? She's the Operations Manager for Redcar and Cleveland Voluntary Development Agency. She's got a key role in supporting the voluntary and community sector across the borough, and she's got a huge amount of experience in all aspects of governance, including advising on which legal structure is appropriate for an organisation. And she also supports the organisation in setting up charities, CIOs and CICs, which she's going to tell everybody what those are later on. And we've also got Heidi. Hello, Heidi. She's our very own operations manager for Social Farms and Gardens. And Heidi's worked for our organisation since 2009, and she's got, again, a huge amount of experience in supporting community and grassroots organisations in setting up different projects, and she's also involved in delivering and managing some of our European programs, including Gardenizer. And you should also be able to see Katie. Hello, Katie. She's our project officer, and Katie's going to be monitoring the questions during the webinar, and she'll lead on the Q&A session at the end. She'll also be monitoring the chat function. So she's going to switch off her audio and her camera during these presentations, just so as not to distract. So you'll just be able to see me, Karen, and Heidi for the course of the presentations. So I think I'm handing over to Heidi to start with. I'll flick the screen on, and I will let Heidi take us through.
Right, thank you very much, Debbie. Okay, so we're going to start with what is governance, and it is a little bit complicated, but Robert Peston put it well when he said that governance is the word for the structures and rules for institutions that are supposed to prevent them from doing the wrong thing. And that is kind of what we're going to be really talking about today, to make sure that you are doing the right thing. It's the systems and processes concerned ensure that there's overall direction, supervision, and accountability for your organization. So it's not directly concerned with the day-to-day running of the organization. It's very much strategic versus operational. And a sort of good example is the difference between steering the ship versus stoking the boiler. So it's easy to forget that you're creating something that might last for a long time, but you're not looking at governance as a way of how you're going to pay your wages and bills, but make sure that you have the systems in place to ensure those wages and bills are paid in a timely manner. So that's what we're going to be looking at today, and hopefully taking you through the various options that you have to do that. So if you can go on to the next slide, Debbie. Okay, so There are legal structures and there are organizational types, and people get a little bit confused by these, but the legal structures are how the laws regard an organization. So it might be that you're a community interest company, or you're a kind of charity, or you might be a sole trader. That would be your legal structure. And to decide what kind of legal structure you're going to be, and we're going to be looking at those later, is you need to sort of decide what you're going to be doing, who's controlling your organization, how are you going to finance yourself, and what kind of money you might be having coming in, what you want to do with the profit, any money that you're making that comes as profit, and what you want to do with your assets if you decide that you have to close. And I suppose a lot of new organizations don't want to think about that when they're first starting, but it is quite important. So then you've also got organizational types, and that's how the organization regards itself. So how are you organized internally? Are you a social enterprise, a cooperative? Are you a community group, a voluntary group? That's more about sort of how you want to make yourself organized within that legal structure. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time looking at the legal structures first, but we can talk about both things later on, perhaps in the questions. So if you move on to the next slide. So if you look at the way organizations are structured, you've got the governing body at the very top, which makes decisions and runs the organization. And usually that governing body is made up of at least 3 people, usually a chair, a treasurer, and then a secretary, but it can be more than that, and you can have lots of different people in charge of how the organization is governed. And then you move on to governing documents, which explain why you exist, and has things like your constitution, your statement of purpose, your articles, that kind of thing about sort of how you do things and how you make decisions. And then at the bottom of your structure, you've got all the people that your members that belong to your group and take part. And that can include your staff, your service users, your volunteers, your supporters, the general community. And then sort of to the right, on the outside world is mainly seeing your governing documents. So they're not necessarily worried about how you're managed by the governing body, but they are really interested in sort of why you exist and what you're trying to achieve. And those governing documents are seen by the outside world usually. Okay, if you move on to the next one. So why would you want to incorporate? Obviously, any group of people can come together, and provided they're not breaking the law, that's fine. They can come together and do things informally. And many organizations look at their structure and decide that it needs to be more formal. And that's often when if you get a grant or some money coming in, then that starts to get a little bit more serious. Or maybe you've been given a big asset like a piece of land or a building. The advantages of incorporating are that you have a robust legal structure that is recognized, and they really do outweigh the disadvantages for care farms and any kind of green care organization. Most care farms will have some sort of legal structure, and the majority are incorporated. I mean, there are some advantages to being unincorporated. If you aren't falling under this, obviously it's very quick, it's free, it's a simple collection of people coming together. Everyone's jointly responsible and everyone has equal rights. There's no administration and no one has to disclose any information. So if you want to stay under the radar, you can do that. But you don't have a legal identity if you do that, and you are putting you and your members at risk potentially. So we are going to spend more time on why to be incorporated. Okay, that's next one.
Thanks, Heidi. That was really interesting. So this slide has been produced as a result of the 2020 annual survey. And when I first saw this, I found it really interesting. This is what care farms have declared in that survey, what their legal governance is. So the statement at the bottom that says less than 2% are not constituted could be right, but the item at the top about charity, 33% declare themselves as charities. Now, charities aren't incorporated in their own right. So there's 2% constituted, but there's also potentially 33% that aren't incorporated. Now, the reason this might be is that charities have actually been around since the 12th century. So the first charity was established in 1136. We then moved to the Elizabethan times, and in Elizabethan times, there was a new Charitable Uses Act brought in. That was in 1597, and in 1602, it was established. We then moved to 1960, when we get the Register of Charities. Now, between 1960 and today, charities have sort of muddled along. So very often in my sector, I find charities that are quite long established, that were maybe established in the 80s, that haven't actually incorporated. So they remain as registered charities. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, this is the importance of good governance. This is actually taken from the Care Farming Code of Practice. So why do you need good governance and a robust legal structure? Well, the Care Farming Code of Practice is really clear. It says care farms provide health, social, or specialist educational care services for individuals from one or a range of vulnerable groups. So it's really important that it's well run, and this comes directly from your code of practice. So can I have the next slide, please, Deborah? So what we're looking at today is just 5 legal structures. These are the main ones that we find in the charitable sector, and probably the ones that you would be more interested in and would be more appropriate for your organisations. So now I'm going to hand over to Heidi for the next slide.
Right, so the first, we wanted to start with this one because this is the sort of really easy way to set up a company, really. So a company limited by guarantee is a very distinct legal entity, and it means that you've got a legal identity in terms of the law. It's often referred to as somebody limited by guarantee is referred to as sort of not-for-profit or a charitable type of company. So it is for any kind of not-for-profit charitable needs. You aren't a charity as such if you're a company limited by guarantee, but you can set up. Obviously, what happens is that you protect people from getting sued, or if any, or for anyone going after people personally, because the guarantee, which is usually £1, is the only amount of money that you have to put in and say might be lost if somebody tried to sue you, because they won't be suing you personally, they'll be suing the company, and that protects people. So it has members who are guarantors for the company's liabilities, and again, those would usually be those 3 people I talked about, a sort of chair, a secretary, and a treasurer is often named. It's incredibly easy to set up. You can do it online. It costs £12. It can be done usually within 24 hours. So it is very, very quick to do. you need to do it through Companies House, and if you just literally search Companies House, company limited by guarantee, everything will pop up and you will see what you need to sort of file to do that. And you need to also complete a memorandum of association and adopt articles, but again, they'll show you kind of what they need to look like, and they aren't complicated. So it is a very, very quick and easy way to become an incorporated organization and have legal standing. So it's something that if you need to do something quickly, or you just want to get something up and running quickly, then I would recommend that. I'll move on.
So back to me. So a charitable company. So if you're already a company limited by guarantee, why should you register as a charity? So if you look at the Charity Commission website, they advise that if your income is over £5,000, that charity should be registered. But it's not just that, because there are some advantages to being a charity. So you actually get tax relief. So you're exempted from corporation tax. You get an 80% mandatory relief from business rates with a 20% discretionary. So very often charities do actually get 100% relief from business rates. You can register for gift aid. So if you've got donations coming in, you get the extra tax on top of the gift aid. You get stamp duty on land tax relief on freehold property and leases acquired for that charitable purpose. So also as a charity, you won't pay VAT on some goods. This tends to be around publicity materials and printing materials. So again, that's a 20% saving. So, so there are some benefits of actually being a charity. You also, it's that thing about being recognised as a charity. What you would do for a charitable company is you would set up a company limited by guarantee, but you would ensure that your aims for that company are charitable. So therefore, you can check this out with the Charity Commission before you actually register your company, and they will come back to you and say if they considered your governing documents to be of charitable purpose. You would then register both with Companies House first and then register with the Charities Commission. The costs for Companies House is, as Heidi's already explained, there isn't a charge for registering a charity. So it becomes an incorporated organisation that has a legal identity separate from its members. So you get everything that Heidi's already discussed. However, you are then charitable, and you have to prove that you're for public benefit at that point. So it's an unpaid board. And this is sometimes a downside for charities in that, particularly if they've been set up by people who are passionate about it. At this present moment, trustees cannot be paid for being trustees of a charitable company. So that might mean that it won't appeal to founders because of that, that element of it. So if we move on to the next slide. So in 1992, it was recognised that we needed a different structure for the charity sector, that not only gave that veil of incorporation, but less cumbersome, because basically with the other one, you have to put returns into 2 different places. This one, you only return to the Charity Commission. So this actually came in 2006 Charities Act. Then the actual legal structure was established in 2010 through the next Charities Act, but we didn't actually see the first one until March 2013. Since then, it's grown in popularity, and there are, in March 2019, there was 17,000 charitable incorporated organisations. Now, with this, the CIO, as it's known, is a legal entity in its own right. It's registered with the Charity Commission. They have trustees, not directors, so there is no involvement with Companies House at all. There's actually two forms of legal structure available, and the templates for these can be downloaded from the Charity Commission website. There's one which is an association CIO, which is suitable for groups that have wide membership. So these are often used by community groups who represent a community of interest or a geographical community. Or the other one is a foundation CIO, in which the trustees are the only members, so they don't hold AGMs, and they have a different way of nominating people onto the board. As I say, regulated by the Charity Commission. So they're the main charitable ones. Just going to have a drink. So if we move on to the next slide, these are community interest companies. Now, these were set up specifically for social enterprises because, again, there was a need for a legal structure, and this was brought in 2004, 2005. So the KIC, there was, at first, we weren't quite sure about them. People, particularly funders, were very, very wary of KICs because they could understand charities. Charities have been around for a long time, where a KIC was a new animal that they didn't really understand. But in the first 10 years, there was actually 10,000 of these KICs set up. Again, because it's quite easy to set up. So the only thing that sometimes people don't understand is that whilst KICs are for social purpose, they cannot be charities. So KICs do not get all those benefits that charities get as far as tax breaks are concerned. However, KICs are really diverse. So you see them in social enterprises, social firms, mutual organisations, large-scale organisations have them. They operate locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally. So they've really caught on. The thing about a KIC is that you have to have an asset lock, and that is to protect the assets that the KIC owns to make sure that they're not sold or divided up for profit. So again, this is something that funders at first weren't quite sure about. In the governing document, and again, you can download a template for a governing document, the asset lock has to be assigned to either another KIC or a charity working in a similar way. So if you set up a KIC, you have to agree with the regulator who that beneficiary is going to be. And then if the KIC closes, it transfers to that person or someone else who at that time you identify and agree with the regulator. You can form a KIC by shares, and sometimes this is used by charities who set up KICs and want to maintain control of them. So they set up a KIC by shares, and the charity is the only shareholder, so it maintains control. Funders don't like kicks by shares. I think the thing is the word shares gets them a bit twitchy. So they prefer to fund kicks limited by guarantee. So now you can, however, pay directors. So this is why this is proven really attractive to people who want to work in their community, support their community, and actually trade within their community. The thing I always tell people who want to set up kicks is that if your business model wouldn't work as a business, it's not going to work as a social enterprise. I think a lot of people go in expecting to get lots of grants and lots of benefits. Even the funders that will fund are looking towards you being sustainable as a business, so they often only fund startup costs. So can we have the next slide, please? Now, the Community Benefit Society, I've worked in the sector for about 17, 18 years, and I've never set up one of these. I'm aware they exist, and it may be something that you're interested in, but they used to be called Industrial and Providence Societies, but the 2014 Act changed the name to a Community Benefit Society. They tend to be similar to cooperatives, and the Cooperative Act brought that in, but where cooperatives are there for their membership, so the individual, community benefit societies are there for the community at large. Very similar to the traditional co-op, so it's one member, one vote, definitely a membership organisation, limited to the value of the shares. It's actually regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. So the only ones I know in my area are the credit unions, and you often find credit unions are set up like that. Okay, next slide.
I think
Have I missed a slide?
no, that's
No,
the end. Yeah,
we're on to this one. Fantastic.
I would agree with Karen that I also have never in 20 years had anyone set up a community benefit society or what was the old IBS. So it's not that common. Occasionally you come across people that have done it already, but yeah.
I have to admit, I've never come across this. I remember kicks being brought in and it being sort of quite a big thing when the CICs were brought in.
Yeah.
We're going to go to questions in a minute. Katie should reappear shortly. I can see the question bubble flashing like crazy, so no doubt there's loads of questions. But as is my prerogative, I'm going to just ask a quick question. Just pick up on something that Karen said. You said at this moment trustees cannot be paid, which made me wonder, something I've never thought about, whether there's something floating about, some suggestion over that. Is this something that might be in the pipeline?
Well, unfortunately, in the 2006 Act that we were waiting for, it was hinted that trustees were going to be paid. We were all very disappointed when it came out, but what can happen now is that trustees can be paid for the services that they offer. So if you've got an accountant on your board and you are looking for an accountant, that trustee can now be paid for that service, but there is conditions. Obviously, it has to be at the market cost. So you have to have at least 2 or 3 other people interested in it. That trustee can't take part in any decision making around it. But previous to 2006, they weren't allowed to be paid in any respect. But unfortunately, that's not what we were looking for. You will see sometimes national bodies pay their trustees, but it's more an honorarium, and it tends to be for a specific role. But unfortunately, most trustees cannot be paid.
And just to add to that, I used to work, I used to be a trustee at a multi-academy trust, and I know when those became more important and sort of started being formed, the government was talking about having trustees for those school trusts paid as well. And I think that's another, rumble that they were talking about, but that hasn't happened. And I think it's very unlikely that that's going to happen anytime soon.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you. Well, I see Katie's appeared, and as I say, Katie, I can see that question bubble flashing like crazy. I'm sure there's loads. Is there loads of questions?
There's a few.
Yeah. Do you want to pick them up with Karen and Heidi then for us?
Yeah. So the first one we've had is you've put, presumably you can still write in charitable objectives and purpose into your company limited by guarantee legal document and structure, even if you don't have the benefits of a charitable status.
You can say that this organization is not for profit, and it does have aims to be sort of charitable, but you can't call yourself a charity. You can just say we're sort of not for profit, and we're here to, whatever money we have will be going back into the organization, but you wouldn't have all the benefits of being a sort of legal charity.
I always advise groups that are looking at setting up a company limited by guarantee. We talk about where they see themselves in the future, and if they want to develop as a charity eventually, we always ensure that their aims and objects are charitable. It's also clearer if you're applying for funding, because funders will look at that aim and ensure that you are of charitable purpose.
But the nature of being a company limited by guarantee does mean that you are a not-for-profit organization. So that's what that means legally anyway. It's quite different from just being a company with shareholders or that kind of thing. So.
Fantastic.
So the same attendee has asked, is it easier to attract funding as a CIC than as a company limited by guarantee?
Mm-hmm. That really does depend on the funder. Karen, I don't know if you have.
Yeah, CICs, very often charitable trusts themselves, so the likes of Garfield Weston and the big charitable trusts can only give to other charities. I know Greg's is the same, Lloyd's is the same. Therefore, because KICs are not charities, you cannot apply. So the amount of funders that you can apply to as a KIC are restricted. As a company limited by guarantee or a charitable company or a CIO, it's more widespread that funders will fund you, because again, it's what they understand, and their duty on behalf of their trust is to ensure that the funds are spent appropriately. So that's why they don't always fund KICs. It is getting a little better as KICs are getting more established. We are finding that some of the bigger charitable trusts are maybe giving 10% to KICs, but it's each individual funder that makes a decision.
Yeah, I mean, I would say some of the really big funders of our sector, like the lottery, they would be open to any kind of organization like that. They'd be happy with whether you are a KIC or a limited company or a charity or any of those they're happy with, or even a cooperative.
Great, thanks. Katie, do you want to pick up the next one?
Yeah, so the next one is, what sorts of policies are needed for governance?
You want to answer that, Karen?
So for governance, policies and procedures are broad as your operations. So without understanding what your operation is, it's quite difficult to answer that question. We always start with safeguarding policies, particularly if you're dealing with young people, people with learning disabilities, vulnerable adults. We always suggest that you should have a safeguarding policy. Health and safety policies, particularly if you've got people coming onto your farms or your gardens, you need a health and safety policy. If you employ people, there's a whole range of HR policies that you need there. But if you're operating as a voluntary group without people employed, my priority would always be safeguarding. Heidi?
Just to add to that, I'd say you would want to think about writing a constitution. Most organizations will often want to see your constitution anyway, and it's sort of looking at sort of the laws, or not the laws, but the rules that you've decided you want to have on your site, or the way you want to operate. So it could be like, we're not going to use pesticides on our site, and that's something that's really important to your organization. And it does give a funder, let's say, or anyone who might be supporting you, an idea of how you want to do business. So it's an important one to consider putting together. It can look however you want it to, though. There's no like set template, although we do at Social Farms and Gardens have a template if anyone wants to see it, that sort of gives you an idea of what you can fill in. But I think a constitution would be good. And definitely like a volunteer policies are another one, because so many people work with volunteers. Sorry,
that's
Debbie.
helpful. I was going to pick up with both of you actually, just if anybody's a question comes up over where can I go to find sort of support in writing a constitution if somebody's starting from nowhere. So we have something with the Social Farms and Gardens. Is there something more widely, Karen, that you can point people towards?
Yes, it depends where you're from. I work at the local Council for Voluntary Service in Redcar and Cleveland. If you go on to our overarching governing body, which is the NC NAC, right, I'll put the link up. They actually list the Council for Voluntary Services in your area, so you can do a search. Everybody at a Council for Voluntary Service will have somebody who supports people in writing memorandum and articles. That's it.
That's great.
It's the governing body.
Yeah. Fantastic. And it's just worth making the point actually as well that Karen mentioned the care farming code of practice as well, and certainly that's a good place to start in terms of sort of a checklist for things to be thinking about in terms of policies relating specifically to care farming. So do get in touch with us specifically over that as well if you're interested. Katie, do you want to pick up that next question from Sandy?
Yes, so Sandy has asked, she would like to check the legislation that we've mentioned, whether it applies in the devolved nations.
Yeah, it applies throughout the UK. So in terms of whether that's considered a legal entity, the ones we've listed are correct for all of the UK.
Right.
Brilliant. There is some differences in Scotland. So all the charity references apply to England and Wales. Ireland and Scotland have some slight differences, and I would always check out their websites. And again, I'll put the contacts for the Scottish Charity Commission on here so that you can check those out.
Great. Thanks, Karen. I noticed for those of you who are sort of monitoring it as well, do keep an eye on that chat function, because one of our members of staff is helpfully just dropping some links in there as we're talking about these things. They're actually being dropped in there so you can find them as we're going along. Katie, do you want to pick up that next question now?
Yes,
Teresa.
so this is a few questions in one. So Teresa has put, when setting up a company limited by guarantee, after all paperwork and article completed and submitted, how long does it take for it to be official? Can there be a quick turnaround on this?
Yeah, it's usually 2 days. I mean, maybe not at Christmas, but it's very, very quick. I mean, definitely within a week, but yeah, it is the quickest because there's so little paperwork to do, and you do not have to go sort of through all the much longer process that becoming a CIO or a charity or a KIC involves. It is very, very quick.
I think that sort of answers the second part of the question as well, which was, is there a lot of paperwork and administration associated with becoming a company by guarantee? So.
No, there's a yearly form that you've got to fill in to sort of show your accounts, but it is very quick and very lacking in some of the details that a charity, for instance, would have. So it's not onerous. It is one of the reasons why, I mean, certainly from you know, maybe not so much care farms, but smaller organizations that were just a newly formed community garden, let's say, if you just want to, but who've got a bit of money or something smaller maybe, then it's a very quick way to get protected, not have any liability beyond that pound, and be recognized in law as an official organization. But you can then go on to become a charity or a CIO, so or a KIC later on.
Yeah, you have to be careful about which ones you're going into. You can move around. However, some KICs, depending on how they're set up, cannot become charities. So you do have to close the KIC and set up a new charity and transfer the assets. So that takes a bit longer. So I would always say, think very carefully about your legal structure, which is why I say, you know, set up as a company limited by guarantee. But if you feel at any time you want to be a charity, you can certainly have that memorandum and articles written in such a way that it's acceptable by the Charity Commission. Registering charities does take a long time, and the paperwork is not easy. And you do have to prove that you are for public benefit and that you are of charitable purpose. However, the benefits can be worth it in the long run, particularly the financial ones from the tax break. So I would always agree with Heidi, if you want to set up a company, you can do it really quickly. Company's House doesn't care what you write in your governing documents.
No, they're not
and I've often had to change governing documents to make them charitable when I've been approached. So it's really worth just taking a little time, getting your memorandum and articles right. Then you're good to go.
Fantastic,
Brilliant.
thanks.
So the next question is from Justine. Thanks, Justine. We've got, which one would you suggest is the most suitable for someone wanting to set up something that they also want to have an income from, where trustees can't be paid, but can funders?
Can founders?
Founders, sorry.
Founders, yeah.
No, no, it's really, again, it's really difficult because I've worked with a lot of founders in the past who are set up charities and then don't realise they then have to relinquish control if they want to be paid. So they have to take a step back and trust a board of trustees before they can receive a wage. The only structure that will allow you to be paid is the CIC, where you can be the sole director. If you want funding, Lottery likes 3 directors, not related or living in the same house. So
yes, that's a good point. I have seen a lot of like husband and wife teams or partners try and all be like one the chair, one the secretary. That's not good. Don't do that. Pick 3 separate people.
Yeah, and interesting, this is by no means my my area of expertise, but having been involved with sort of supporting care farms and working with networks of them for a long time, that I've certainly had it raised with me in the past, sort of issues where farms are on sort of, you know, private land, sort of family land that perhaps sometimes sort of tied up in trusts and that sort of thing, and then the farmer is wanting to sort of do this as part of his business, but is advised to sort of set up the charity on the land, and it can all end up being quite complicated. And I think it's probably worth saying that in some instances it may be that you know, yes, sort of specialist agricultural advisor is needed on top as well to look into this. So I don't think we can sort of cover every eventuality today, but there are certainly sort of cases where it does require some thought, and it can be quite complicated. Katie, do you want to pick up on another? I think we've had 3 from the same person, so I think we can sort of pick up those. I think it's a sort of follow-on question, isn't it, from one of the previous ones?
So it's following on about the question about the policies that would be needed, and as Mina has asked about the legal side, whether we need something about disabilities, about training and insurance, and whether faith groups have to have similar restrictions and have to follow strict guidelines.
You don't have to have any of that, but if that's an important part of your organization and what you do, and maybe who you're applying for funding, then you might want those. But there isn't any requirement to.
No, we always advise on best practice. Apart from health and safety, I don't think there's any legislation around having a disability policy, equality and diversity policy. There's a whole raft of policies that
you could have
maybe asked for. And Heidi's quite right. Some funders will ask for specific policies, and again, it tends to be around safeguarding, because that's the thing that frightens them. So they like to see that you've got safeguarding. They will, what I'm being asked for now is COVID-19 risk assessment. So there's a lot of policies that you could have. But as we said earlier, it depends what you actually do. So again, NCVO, which is different from NAVCA, do have a range of policy templates that you can look at, and you can look at the range of them. You can't look at the specifics without being a member, but it will certainly give you some guidance as to the type of policies you should be looking at.
What I would say is we do have loads and loads of policies for our members that they can look at. So start by going on our website and you probably find things. But if you don't, I expect Debbie, you know, get in touch directly, and we probably do have them somewhere that we can share. I certainly have absolutely bucket loads on my computer that I'm happy to share. So.
Yeah, no, indeed. As if you want to contact us sort of direct afterwards, just ping us an email over. We can certainly point you towards towards more help on those. I've noticed.
Can I caution that if you do have a template or copy somebody else's, that you actually make sure you change the names?
Yes.
Because I've worked with groups who were based in the Northeast, and their safeguarding policy said that they were in a football association when they were actually a netball club. So be very cautious about that.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Our code of practice assessors have highlighted this when they're sort of they take a very dim view of a sort of tick box exercise where somebody's not actually put a lot of thought into it. I think you raised the sort of issue of best practice. We should be looking particularly in instances where what we're doing is sort of supporting really sort of quite vulnerable people, that we should be looking at sort of best practice rather than sort of the legal minimum, I guess is very much where we stand on the code of practice. Katie, I see Sandy's just picked something else up. Do you want to just pick that one up?
So Sandy has asked, would a mutually assured trust be a structure that is worth investigating further?
I have never worked with a mutually assured trust. Have you, Karen?
No, I think it's very similar to a cooperative. I think it's in that whole community benefit. There's a number of different structures in there, so I think that would. I could certainly look it up for you and see and get back to you with an answer if that would help. I'll send the answer through.
Fantastic. Sandy, I'm wondering whether you are from, because Ray raised a sort of question about the devolved nations, and I'm wondering whether you are possibly in Scotland. And it's just worth saying as well, we do have a Scottish team, Social Farms and Gardens. So again, if you want to sort of ping us an email afterwards, we can put you in sort of direct contact with them as well. We've got a very interesting question from Sarah Bevan, Katie, haven't we?
Yes, so Sarah has asked, if one of you were setting up a new care farm and you just wanted to cover costs and not take an income, which model would you go with? It's a brilliant question.
Putting them on the spot now.
Oh, wow.
You're going to get two different answers here because you're from a different side. I mean, I would look at setting up a CIO.
That's actually what I would look at too, because there's so many advantages to becoming one. It does take a little longer, but if you've got the time to get it all together, then you're going to have tons of benefits at the end, really.
Great, there we are. The answer to all. CIO. You heard it here from Heidi and Karen. Fantastic. I think that's it, unless anybody has got anything else that they want to sort of ping across now at the 11th hour. We've certainly had lots of thanks from Heidi and Karen. I think has been really interesting. Oh, we have had another one just pinged in. Katie, do you want to pick that one up?
Yep, so that's from Katie, and she's asked, where may we find guidance on different ways to set up governance structure in terms of the board, etc., or does it really all depend on which legal structure you go with? So then for some background information on where Katie's coming from, she's put, we are a community field project which is set up with an existing CIC, which is a food cooperative, and want to have our own governance.
Okay. I mean, you could write your own constitution for that part of your organization. That would be a good start. And then you need to just see if you're in terms of bringing people onto a board, is that what they're asking about, like other people being part of the board?
Quite a big question.
Yeah,
hang on.
Where they might find guidance on the different ways to set up a governance structure in terms of the board.
Yeah, so you might just look at the whole who's on that board, and if they've got another angle that they're coming at, then they're probably going to want a few more people that know more about care farming, let's say, to be on that board. But
that's quite a big question, actually, Katie. If you want to ping us again an email over that, and then we can Heidi might be able to pick up on that in a bit more detail for you on that, and I'm sure we'll be able to sort of point you towards some places for more support if we can't do it ourselves.
I mean, if you're looking for board members, your local CVS often has a volunteer centre. If you want in new blood in, what tends to happen with boards is that you rope in family and friends, and you tend to find that the same people are on every board. So if you're looking for new people, new blood, it's worth going to your local CVS. If you want to set up something separate from the KIC, I agree with Heidi, you could set up a simply constituted group that isn't incorporated, just to see where you want to go. You can get funding on a simple constitution, and then see how you develop, and then decide the best legal structure if you decide to incorporate moving forward.
Right, and as we're talking, actually, as I mentioned before, do keep an eye on that little chat box, because Sarah is very helpfully dropping all sorts of links in there as we're discussing things and highlighting them. So keep an eye on that. We have. Oh, Katie, just to pick up on that, she was talking about, yes, how to elect and manage a group. So I think we've just sort of that was within that same question about electing and managing the group. But as I say, I think some of those links in there might be able to help. And Katie, again, if you want us to pick that up further, then ping us an email afterwards. We've got another question there, Katie, haven't we? Is it from Paula?
Yes, so Paula has said, I currently provide residential support services in my own home to a CIC set up by my local authority. I want to widen out and use my orchard and garden for daycare. Is it compatible? Currently, it's on a basis of self-employed status.
It could be compatible. I mean, they certainly could set up something bigger, but as long as she doesn't, if she's self-employed right now, that means she doesn't have a governing body and she doesn't have other people telling her how to do things. So if she's happy not to have that and have a wider, open it up a bit more, which may have its benefits, then that could be, that could be a good thing.
Yeah, indeed. And again, that's quite a specific question. So again, Paula, if you want to just pop us an email just to sort of pick that up in a bit more detail, then we're more than willing to sort of follow up and help you where we can. I'm just a bit conscious of time now. We're coming up towards the end of our hour, and we've had loads of questions, and yes, it's certainly quite interesting. And I think for me as well, Karen, talking about the very early stages of charities back in Elizabethan times, I didn't know that. So I've learned something today. It's a huge subject that this is one of, we were commenting before that this is one of the sort of webinars that's been really, we've had a lot of take up, and there's always a lot of interest. And again, a lot of questions tend to be quite sort of specific and individual. So while we can certainly help where we can, but we're also sort of happy to signpost and point you on to other people maybe in your local areas that can help. But I just want to say thank you very much to both Karen and Heidi for what you've done and what you've talked us through. You've given us a lot of information today, and we hope that everybody else has found it useful as well. Thank you, Katie, as well, for handling the questions, and Sarah, who is behind the scenes busily beavering away, dropping all those very useful links into the chat function. So what's going to happen now? You're going to receive an automated email a few hours after the webinar, and there'll be a link to a short feedback survey. So if you could please, if you've attended, just do complete it, because it helps us keep a track of who's accessing our resources, and provides opportunities for us to learn and adapt our work moving forward. And you can also use that to let us know if you want to have any sort of more ideas of future webinars that you'd like us to put on. We're always really keen to hear back from people and hear about what you want. It came from one of the members and out of another webinar, this governance one, actually somebody asked us to run something specifically. So we had a couple of people asking. The webinar is being recorded and we will be uploading it shortly, so you can always come back and access it again. But as I said before, please do feel free to contact the Growing Care Farming team or the wider Social Farms and Gardens team for any further information or support. I've just put that slide up, so that's our sort of email address you can get us on, and the website. And please do follow us on Twitter as well. We're very hot on Twitter, so please follow us and tag us into any social media you're doing. So I think that is everything from me. We hope to see you again. I should probably wish everybody a very happy Christmas. Actually, we're very close to the end of the year. I should have had my little antlers on really to make it a little bit more Christmassy. But yes, I hope everybody has a fantastic Christmas, as festive as they can manage it in these strange times. And our next webinar will be in January. Keep an eye on the newsletters and the links. We're running that on sort of care farming and dementia. With our partners Dementia and Venture, and I think that's going to be very, very interesting as well. So we look forward to seeing you then. So thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.